Welcome to Front and Center, from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields. There's a tremendous amount of things going on right now in this time of convergence and change. But before we jump into the topic today, which is mind control, I wanted to bring back to our audience and to please make sure that you've gone on and watched our last podcast. The last podcast, which was on October 18th, a little over a week ago, why free speech is a life or death issue. It's time to wake up and smell the coffins, as Steve and Swami Beyondananda would say. So please go back and watch that. We, out of respect for Google and for YouTube, did not place it up here because we did not want to put those good people into a position of having to censor us to follow the government guidelines and regulations that are going on. So please go back and watch that. But before we get into today's show, and I'm going to try a few things, we're going to try to share with you a number of small, short segments of a very important podcast by Robert Kennedy Jr., where he discusses Google and mind control with a Dr. Robert Epstein, who will explain his research on how Google and other tech companies have manipulated public perception and behavior, how they potentially have shifted up to 25.5 million votes in an election. He will highlight the search engine manipulation effect, which can alter public opinion by as 20 to 80% with just a single exposure. Epstein's monitoring system, called America's Digital Shield, captures and analyzes ephemeral content, revealing Google's bias, and it's a significant bias. He will emphasize the need for transparency, consumer choice, and monitoring to counteract these manipulations. But before we get into that, I do want to share with you some additional information that was brought back on the last one, which we will link at the bottom of these show notes on censorship and surveillance from an important article that will help highlight the Center for Countering Digital Hate, sometimes referred to as CCDH. And they're known as the authors of Disinformation Dozen. How they have, through leaked documents, have shown the plan to kill X and Twitter and take down popular social media accounts on other platforms, to censor non-establishment voices and bring back attacks on anyone who is considered an anti-vaxxer or is talking against the narrative that our government wants you to hear. So with that, before we jump into the show, Steve, and get into these segments, do you have anything you'd like to say at this time?
Yeah, we've been talking about free speech for the last few shows. And again, when we think about, curtailing free speech and censorship, we think of book banning and book burning and all of that sort of stuff. However, it's gotten very, very sophisticated. And to paraphrase that famous quote, if a speech falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, is it still free speech? So what we're going to be talking about today are all of the ways that information is curtailed before you even get there. So you have no idea that it's being censored. You have no idea that you're being fed certain narratives. And you go, well, I don't feel like I'm being censored. I can say anything I want. When you start to unpack this, as we will today, you're going to see the very, very insidious ways using technology that we are being prevented, and not just us, but our fellow American people and people in the world are being prevented from seeing and hearing certain concepts. So this is a very important show, regardless of where you think you land on the political spectrum. Whoever they came for first, they're going to come for you at some point. So let's watch this and learn. Thanks, Michael.
All right, so let's jump in here with segment one. You don't know what they don't show. Everybody see my screen all right? Steve, can you see the screen okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, here we go.
Right? Or as I like to say now, you don't know what they don't show. And by they, I mean the big tech companies, primarily Google. And so, I've been studying that. That's a separate thing than my work on the carrier separation plan, but I've been studying the ability that Google and other tech companies have to control our thinking, our behavior, our emotions, our elections, our children, right?
Wow. How do they do that now? How do they actually do that control? So let's watch this segment here.
That the search engine is the most powerful mind control machine that's ever existed. That when you start to type a search term, you're being manipulated from the very first character that you type. I said this at a hearing when I first testified before Congress, and Ted Cruz pulled out his cell phone and he said, "Oh yeah, show me." I said, "Fine, type the first letter in the alphabet." So he types A. I said, "Are they making any suggestions for what you should be looking at?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "I got 5 suggestions. What are they?" I think 3 or 4 of them were for Amazon. I said, "Gee, why are they trying to send you to Amazon? You weren't looking for Amazon, were you?" He goes, "No." I said, "Because Amazon is Google's largest advertiser, and Google is Amazon's single largest source of traffic. That the search engine."
Wow. And we all experience that every time you search.
It's like the old, you took the words right out of my mouth. Now it's, you put the words right into my mouth.
Yeah, and when I was in advertising and had a publishing business for 20 years, back in the early 90s, very early 90s, and we were going from all print, we were going online, we were building a website, we were having our writers write stories using particular words, and we called it search engine optimization, SEO. That was the big thing in advertising and marketing and publishing, was to how do you maximize the search engine to draw people to you. We had no clue at that time. Nobody in our world was thinking about the nefarious ways that search engine optimization, pulling specific words, using specific words, would draw people there for anything other than, we were trying to get people to go to Disneyland. We were trying to get people to go to Universal Studios. We were trying to get them to know and learn about, these great fun places here in my tourist magazines. And no one thought, oh, you might be trying to bring people to a particular ideological point of view, that you would be trying to elect candidates that would help ensure your continued growth of your particular product to really change dramatically. Can we jump to the next one, Steve? Come on.
Go ahead.
I want to hear some of that great Swami.
Well, I want
to, me, would you?
Swami, how I love you, how I love you. I think what we really want to do is get a real sense of how this thing really operates. And well, here's an example. I mean, if you were to, let's say, Google Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you would not get to anything positive about him. You would only get to what the mainstream media is saying and the negative commentary and criticism. So it's very hard to get to an original document if they don't want you to see it. For example, if you were to Google, try Googling this particular video interview, you would never find it. It would never be found. It would be probably in the, thousandth iteration of what you're trying to look for. So this is really, really important because we like to think that there is this great universal cloud of information that we have access to. And yet, because of who is controlling the channeling of that information, our freedom is very curtailed in this regard.
Oh, and in the podcast conversation with Kennedy, and by the way, Amaryllis Fox is the third person in that, and she is an incredible lady I've gotten to know through the campaign. She's brilliant, and Robert introduces her. She's his daughter-in-law. She's the head of the campaign for Kennedy, and now obviously working on the Trump. But they give a couple of examples of that, and one of which was if you tried to Google, well, I'll leave theirs for them. Rebellious Truths, our particular videos that we had created back in 2011 and 12 on rebellious truths. We were trying to talk about, and we're talking about accountability and truth in government and transparency, these kind of topics. They scrubbed it. It's gone. You can Google it, you can search it, you can go to YouTube, and it's gone. Just a few weeks ago, gone, never to be heard of again. So this is what we're trying to just bring to our audience, and those is some of the highlights of what you can expect and what you need to listen and learn a lot more about in this specific podcast about Google and mind control that Kennedy does. So here's the next segment about the search suggestions effect.
And these are for some of your findings. SEME demonstrates how biased ephemeral content, such as search results and video recommendations, influence users' decisions. Just one exposure to the type of biased content can shift a person's perspective by 20 to 80%, with repeated exposures raising that potential to 90%. The SSE, which is the search suggestion effect, refers the impacts of search suggestions in drop-down as an online user is looking up information. A Google search suggestions can shift undecided voters' opinions from a 50-50 split to almost 90-10, all without user awareness. That is terrifying, because that's really the end of democracy. How does democracy survive that?
And then it goes back to what the whole point of the last two shows in this is to help people understand why at the crux of everything is free speech. And if we don't have free speech, we're already in a world of totalitarian control.
Some of this dates back to 1928. People perhaps have heard of Edward Bernays, and Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, who has been called the father of modern public relations. And his work really had to do with how one manipulates public opinion. And the most famous Bernays story is the Easter Parade 1928. He's working for the American Tobacco Company, makers of Lucky Strike cigarettes. And at that point in the 1920s, it was not considered proper for women to smoke. So he got these young women dressed up as suffragettes. And at a particular point where he alerted all the press that it's going to happen, they all lit up cigarettes and held them up as torch of freedom, so that now women are free to smoke. Now, that was done without the benefit of social media. He got the reporters reporting on the Easter Parade to come to that, and that was how that influence was made by Edward Bernays. And the Swami would say that since that time, just about every piece of information we receive through advertising and through media is slathered in Bernays sauce, right? So part of that slathering in Bernays sauce is the very, very subtle influences that we have, so subtle and so surreptitious that we think we're thinking of this ourselves. As an example, during the pandemic, one of the ways I understood that people were really internalizing this propaganda as truth is when they're repeating what they hear. Safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. Follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. And so what happens is that when you follow Google and follow the links that they're taking you to, they're going to take you to a brainwashing. And, as you said earlier, mind control sounds very serious, but that really is. It does control the way we think. Bobby Kennedy just said that it can impact how a person votes by 80%. So I think part of the awareness and the upwising and the waking up is waking up to how we're being manipulated. And when we start hearing these certain phrases that have been planted into our consciousness and hear ourselves repeating those phrases, recognize that it goes back to that early influence of propaganda, where we've become much, much more sophisticated in the, almost 100 years since Bernays started doing his work.
And I've mentioned this in previous podcasts that my first class in advertising down at San Diego State back in 1968, the professor said, the term advertising marketing were these nice new terms that had been created because they couldn't use the term propaganda because of its connection to World War II and the images of all the horrific things that have been done through war. So they came up with this new term of advertising marketing, which is behaviors and beliefs. And we weren't thinking in the public of the incredible leaps of technology to today, where we have the internet, which we thought was going to be this great, great tool to lift humanity up and to be able to share ideas and be an incredible innovator. And it's done a lot of that, but there were people there who were thinking, how can I use this, and have taken it to the extreme now. And they give the example, and I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but I really encourage everyone, again, to watch the Kennedy podcast, Google and Mind Control, which we'll be linking at the bottom. He gives the example that we were talking about in the internal Kennedy campaign meetings about how we had gone from 20+ % in the polls and we were shrinking now. Once they saw us as a major threat and they started implementing and attacking Kennedy through the use of these search engines, they were bringing his ratings down into the low single digits so that they could keep him off, use that as an excuse to keep him out of the debates, which has led to the unity government. So it's all working out for the good. But with the election coming up in a vote, let's jump to the next segment. On election day, you'll see this GOTV, GoTV. That's Get Out the Vote is what it's short for. And here's a little example of how a test was done, and I'll let him explain it here, that moved significant voters. So let's watch this little segment here.
In 2012, Facebook and some of my colleagues out here, University of California, San Diego, published a piece in Nature, about what they had done in the 2010 midterms. They had sent go vote reminders on election day all day long to 60 million Facebook users. And they had some very clever ways, and they had a control group. They had some clever ways of determining whether that got some more people to vote. They calculated that vote reminder got 340,000 more people to get off their butts on election day.
Wow. And you can see that getting ready to happen again. Google and the others will use their influence to help continue to elect the status quo, the Democrats in this case, the uniparty that's shown its head, because they know that if under the leadership of Trump, and I like to think of Trump, he's not this great candidate. He's got his flaws. He's definitely the bull in the china shop. He's not that panther that would slither through there and be this very presidential person. He truly is a bull in the china shop that knocks a lot of shit over and creates a lot of turmoil. But in the end, he is the bull in the china shop, and we've got to ride this bull to the end so that this team of unity government that would go in there with Kennedy, Gabbard, Elon Musk, and a whole host of really dedicated people who've proven their commitment to truth and to humanity will get in there and begin the process from the top down while we continue from the outside, from bottom up, to begin the process of washing our government of so much of what has calcified all of the mechanisms of its evolution and of its ability to serve the people's interest over the leadership of a party's interest or the moneyed interest, the oligarchs of the world. Anything you want to add, or does Swami want to jump in here before we go to the next?
Well, I think what's really important here is to really see this as the true existential issue, that what we are allowed to see will determine how we support or don't support the policies that our government is putting forward. And if we don't know about them, I think that part of the really toxic thing that I noticed during the COVID lockdowns, Trudy and I, my wife and I, we spend our evenings educating ourselves by watching outside of the corral, so to speak, of what's acceptable. And I've seen the results of people, the fear that has been put into people simply by what they're watching and how that's exaggerated and exemplified. And of course, I'm not, I'm definitely aware of the toxicity, some of the toxicity on the Trump campaign. I was very disturbed when I watched the Madison Square Garden so-called comedian do his non-funny, toxic, racist stuff. And I'm going, does Trump have like a political death wish or something where he's allowing this shit to happen? So I have to recognize that that's a balance. That's something that is more than what's being exaggerated. Plenty of stuff is being exaggerated. So I think it's really important that we recognize, we get sober about the shadow of each side and the importance of unifying in spite of all of that, above and beyond that, so that we have an independent voice in this country that gets amplified and does not pull us into either of these polarities. I'm thinking that those kinds of things are the pieces that help destroy the unity that we want to be creating. So I see that as a real issue that's going to send those independent voters that we want to collect and we want to connect to this idea. That's going to stop them from. It's going to be that stopper. So I don't want to see that, but I want to acknowledge that that's true. That there's that element, just as there are some very, very toxic elements on the so-called progressive side. The difference between the two, one is overt, the other is covert. So what we're talking about here today, while people are going, oh, isn't that horrible what the guy did at Madison Square Garden, let's please remember that this covert, the covert stuff is in a way more egregious because we don't see it. It doesn't look as evil as it really is.
Yeah, and to your point, people can say all kinds of ugly shit, and what somebody else says doesn't speak for everyone else. It only speaks about that jerk, that idiot comedian who thought it was funny and appropriate to say that kind of stuff. He obviously needs to go to school with Charles Eisenstein and learn about how in the hell we're going to move together and not be othered and be doing the kind of stuff he does. But to the other side of that coin, we just got Saturday the Muslims and Arab leaders have come out in Michigan hugely now 100% behind Trump because of they have met with him extensively and realized and are convinced that he is the only one that will truly bring peace. And it couldn't be more difficult when you hear that kind of stuff from that comedian on stage at Madison Square Garden, and you see this giant bull in the china shop when he knocks things over, and these kind of people rear their ugly head and spew their mouth with all this kind of garbage that's hate-filled. That's what we got to clean it out, and that's where we got to get started. And that's where people like Bobby and the Kennedy, we had a thing called the Kennedy Way, and we do it every time when somebody flips us off on the freeway, or somebody were to come by and say crap to us in booths on tabling. We remind each other, and when somebody's flipping us off the freeway, I look at them, let them know I see them flipping us off angrily, and I give them the big heart sign and says, it's okay, you're still an American, and I forgive you for, in my mind, I'm saying I forgive you for your ignorance. And there, but for the grace of God, could all of us go. So let's share this next segment, keep an eye on the clock, about did we do the how they weaponize the search?
I don't think we have done that yet.
All right, so that's up next. Okay.
Okay.
Let's do this one.
To people who search for information about Elizabeth Warren, they are sending extreme conservative content that absolutely trashes Elizabeth Warren. Why would they be doing that? Because Elizabeth Warren has gone on record calling for the breakup of Google. They want her out. Now with you, they're sending content that on a graph looks very blue. In other words, it's liberally biased, but that's just the graph. But if you look at the actual content that they're sending people to, if people click on those high-ranking links in their search results, you end up with, I'm not going to say them, but you can, if you want to share them, that's fine. They are sending people to one piece after another, one website after another, one article after another, one video after another that makes you look like the devil.
So I wanted to share that clip because it shows how they'll attack anybody, even on the Democratic side. Elizabeth Warren, because she's come out on this thing about breaking them up, which is they talk about a little later why that's, you know, a way to move them into an area that they know cannot happen and won't happen, away from consumer protection and into this issue of antitrust, which is a bogus move to keep people thinking, oh, we're working to fix this, when bullshit. They know that is never going to happen, and even if it did, they could sell off a division. But that they go into more detail, folks, again in this hour and 20-minute great important podcast that you all, I couldn't encourage you more to watch, that we're trying to give you a sense of feel here on and expand on in our short time. Yeah, Steve?
I want to offer a perspective on fascism, this word that's been thrown around a lot. Now, there's one definition of fascism which focuses on some authoritarian personality, etc., etc. But Mussolini himself said that the proper word for term for fascism is corporatism. And corporatism is the unholy alliance between the coercive power of government and corporations. And now we would have to add, updating this by about 80 or 90 years, the media. And so what we're seeing right now is this seamless interlocking directorate between the powers that be in power and the media, and that is really fascism. We have fascism right now. The fact that there's not that all of these layers have been put onto our searches so that we are steered toward what really is misinformation, what really is disinformation, and doesn't allow us to see the missing information that would help us make the full decision. So for people who are complaining that Trump is promoting fascism, I would suggest that the fascism that Benito Mussolini described is in place right now by controlling what we see.
Yep. And when we did the podcast or the video interview back in 2012 with Mickey Huff, who's the executive director of Project Censored, and he was talking about how corporate media was 97+% of mainstream media, and all messaging in the country was controlled 12 years ago by 7 companies. The concentration of the power and the wealth continues. Now it's by 4 or 5 companies control it. The concentration of wealth into these fewer and fewer hands just continues. So let's go to, so we don't leave everybody in the limited time we have left that we're already running over. So we don't leave people on such a downer note. There is hope. And they go into on the podcast, how do we fix it? And I'm not going to go through all of it. I want you all to listen to it there. But let's share with these last 2 segments. One is about monitoring and what the effect of monitoring is. So let's go here.
Fact is that without a monitoring system, you see, no one would ever know. And we know that when you bias search results and search suggestions in that way, that easily shifts 20 to 80% of undecided voters. And even on election day itself, there are still undecided voters. And they know who they are, and they're using these techniques to influence them. Again, without a monitoring system, you don't know any of this, nothing, especially those targeted messages on their homepage. You don't know anything that they're doing. In fact,
and that's where and we're going to share with you at the end, folks, 3 links that Dr. Epstein will talk about that we're not going to share with you, about America's Digital Shield, where he explores the data and analyzes from the monitoring system. It's really interesting to go there and see the data that they've got from their over 16,000 current people that they're using as monitors. He'll go in and explain that in more detail. They'll review on another one called Privacy Tips. So you go to myprivacytips.com, and how you can eliminate their ability to manipulate your search. And I haven't done it yet. I'm excited to go do it, and I'll probably do it this afternoon. And then last but not least, learn more about how the Tech Watch Project, which you can volunteer for and make an application to become one of the Tech Watchers, and you go to techwatchproject.org. Again, those will all be linked at the bottom. But we want to get on, since we're over time. Let's jump real quick, Steve, if you don't mind, to the Declare Their Search Index a Public Commons. This is one of the 3 key ways that legitimately can and will be done if we can get a new leadership into the White House, such as Kennedy and others, that we could begin to clean up these departments and clean up our government, make it truthful, and make it to serve American people's interests and all of humanity and our planet's interests and needs. So I'm going to jump into that. Steve, go ahead and comment while I find this.
Okay, well, first of all, I think it's very, very important that for a moment we put aside whatever political differences we have and recognize that the biggest issue is who's in charge of who's in charge. That we get pulled onto the battlefield of culture issues all the time as an intention. This is intentional. We are intentionally being divided. The forces of, I would use the word evil. The forces of evil use the tools of fear. They use the tools of secrecy. They use the tools of lies. And they use the tools of division. And when there is an independent movement that, Bobby and Tulsi are looking to move forward through the only daylight they were able to find. There was no daylight on the other side. There was no willingness after Bobby presented this to Kamala Harris as well. There was no willingness on that side. to create this transparency, to create a truly uniting America movement. And so he was welcomed by the other side. So I think it's very important that we see that right now, from a strategic standpoint, the biggest issue is who's in charge of who's in charge, and the transparency and the censorship. Because if that is gone, then that is pretty much the end of democracy. So this is an existential issue, and right now, this is the most important issue. It won't go away after the election. It'll require a unified, independent movement. You've been in touch with Christopher Life. I'm sure we'll have him back on the show very soon after the election to talk about the strategy for building this independent movement be up above and beyond the two political parties. However, the first step is awareness. And regardless of which side you find yourself on, please do not dismiss this free speech issue, because it is fundamental to what we really call democracy.
Steve, you said it so well. Yeah, and we'll be jumping on that because win, lose, or draw coming out of this, we'll see how it plays out. But the independent movement that will take the shape of independent new alternate parties throughout the country that can have principle-based guidance and leadership that can help elect people of all kinds of persuasions, all kinds of different perspectives, as long as they're committed to truth that serves the people they're there to serve with integrity. They're not there to get rich. They're not there to serve the oligarchs or the corporate interests. They're there to serve the people. We'll be able to begin to change, but it does come from the top down and the bottom up, so we can meet in the middle and fix this. So, I don't think I'll jump into this. We don't need to go into declare the search engine of public comments, but that's a great solution. Do you want me to show this last segment or
Yeah, please show it, because I think this is the direction that we need to go in, including, I mean, it's great to monitor these things, but you can monitor how many people are killed, by a body count. You can monitor that. That's important, but stopping the body count is even more important.
Well, yeah, and exactly, because monitoring only tells you what they've done.
Yeah.
We've got to get out in front of it. And AI, and they go into a good conversation about AI being the tip of the iceberg that we're on now, and at how this monitoring, if done in advance, can be the early warning system that when corporations, when these platforms, these search engines get off track, we can hold them accountable, get them back on track, and have people with enough choice to do it. So let's hear this segment about declare their search engine of public comments, which is really doable as if one of the early steps.
Declare that to be a public commons. There's ample precedent for this in law. Governments have been doing this for hundreds of years, because once some commodity or service becomes essential, then there's room for abuse. And that includes air and water and gasoline and telephone communications. Once it becomes essential, the government at some point always steps in and either takes charge or regulates. In this case, if our government declared their index to be a public commons, then everyone could build search engines using their data, and you'd end up with thousands of search engines competing for our attention, which would be just like the news environment. There would be competition and innovation.
Competition and innovation and choice for people. And instead of allowing the government to be the regulator, the free choice of people would be that regulator. We're actually really excited. I'm really excited. I just pray, and I mean that sincerely, that humanity has suffered enough and to bring enough people together so that we can begin to solve these problems. I pray that we don't have to ask humanity to continue to suffer needlessly at the expense of these people who want to create a world in their vision, these lower G gods who think of themselves of above all of us. Steve?
Yeah, we're at a very, very important point, and that's why I call what I do the Great Upwising. Wake up, wise up, grow up, and show up. 4-step program, guaranteed to work 3 times faster than 12-step. And what's very important about that right now is we are in apocalyptic times, the lifting of the veils. And I know a lot of people go, oh, I don't want to see my government naked. But it's very, very important as part of our spiritual evolution as a species to be able to face the music and dance together, focusing on that divine love that's in our hearts that we all have in common, that's been deplatformed by the culture of materialism, that has to be recaptured, regardless of whether you approach that from a formal religious standpoint, from an individual spiritual standpoint, from a secular ethical standpoint. We all know in our hearts what love is. We may not have ever seen God, but we've all seen good. That's the focus. That's the common focus. And what I'm looking forward to in this next period of time, the 3 precepts of our Front and Center podcast, from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields, seeking the whole truth together, because we've been, we've just seen on this podcast that we've been excerpting, that we have been channeled into very specific truths that are not the whole truth, So we want to seek the whole truth together, and finally putting our government on the side of the people. So those are our 3 precepts. We're never going to give up, and that's the purpose of this podcast. And I'm hoping that we can bring left and right, front and center, to turn the funk into function and leave the junk at the junction.
And that's the Swami channel that I love to hear and is right. And folks, it is a long journey to the more beautiful and just world. We're all in. Thousands and thousands of people are all in. I would ask of you to make sure that you become all in. Do what you can to help in this transformative times so that we can move towards that more beautiful and just world that our hearts know is possible. It's a long journey. Please join us. Thank you so much.